The US dollar makes up about 60% of the world's currencies and is currently the global reserve currency. But is that at risk? How long can it last? And if the dollar goes away and is replaced by something like the Chinese yuan, what does that mean for American investors? We'll explore that in today's video. Iran, Russia, the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa have been moving away from the dollar. We've seen that a lot in headlines just in the last few months, especially seeing last week that China and Russia announced a deal where they are going to buy and sell oil, not with US dollars, which has been customary since 1944, but they are going to trade directly with each other in their own currencies. The talk of countries moving away from the global reserve currency of the dollar has been happening for over 20 years. I've been an investor for 30 years. I'm a chief financial officer and used to be a Wall Street analyst. And looking back in history, I can see that this has been talked about for a long, long time. In fact, the Fed chair, Jay Powell, said that it's possible that we could have more than one global reserve currency. We don't necessarily need one. So what is a global reserve currency and how did it come about? In 1944, at the famous Bretton Woods Agreement, the Allies decided that they wanted to have a stable currency that could be the reserve currency that countries could trade in, that they didn't have to worry about fluctuations as some countries had gone through, especially during World War II. They wanted a country and a currency that was stable. They chose the US dollar largely because the United States emerged World War II as the most powerful country in the world and could command that the US dollar become the reserve currency. That was 79 years ago. And previous to the US dollar becoming the reserve currency, the British pound held the title for 105 years, from 1815 to 1920. Before that, it was the French, 1720 to 1815. And about every 100 years, or 94 years to be exact, according to Ray Dalio, a new currency, a new country emerges. So we're at 79 years. So are we nearing the end of the dollar? Before we get to that, let's talk about some of the benefits for a country to have a global reserve currency and the benefits that accrue to other countries that can use it. Number one is it's stable. There's stability that's backed by something. In this case, the largest economy in the world, the most stable economy in the world, despite the problems the US has in the country and the economy, it is still the largest and most stable and strongest economy in the world, which also incidentally is backed up by the largest and strongest military in the world. That has provided stability for the last 79 years post-World War II. That's one of the benefits that the global community has to have this stable currency. Number two is foreign exchange reserves. It allows countries to invest in foreign exchange reserves that can be stable, that they can count on, that is backed by a large economy. It's a benefit for countries to be able to have those reserves that they can buy in US dollars, to invest money into the US dollars, to put in a bank, so to speak, that can be stable. And number three, it's the ability for countries to buy oil. The dollar was known as petrodollars after Bretton Woods for good reason, because of the special relationship that Franklin Delano Roosevelt cultivated with the king of Saudi Arabia after Bretton Woods in February of 1945. FDR met the king of Saudi Arabia on a U.S. destroyer in the Suez Canal, and they hit it off right away. They built a really strong relationship. In fact, after the meeting, the king of Saudi Arabia referred to FDR as his brother, said they felt like brothers. They were about the same age. They both had some physical ailments that made it difficult for the king to walk, and FDR was in a wheelchair. They sent each other gifts after the meeting. In fact, FDR gave the king of Saudi Arabia one of his wheelchairs, and the king later said that it was one of his most prized possessions. So they really hit it off. And one of the agreements that came out of that meeting was that in exchange for getting access to the oil from Saudi Arabia, the U.S. would protect Saudi Arabia. That is one of the reasons why the U.S. has such a strong, cozy relationship with Saudi Arabia, because of that agreement that was made in 1945 between the two leaders, and it has lasted for generations. And protected the interest of two major oil companies since then. That was Chevron and Texaco. Incidentally, one of the reasons why the U.S. was so keen on protecting that oil, two things is, one, they wanted to make sure that the U.S. had access to that oil and not other countries, particularly the British, and also that there was a lot of research saying that the world was running out of oil. Does that sound familiar? It's been happening for a long time. And they wanted to make sure that they had a way to get easy access to oil. So next, what happens if, the US dollar is losing some of its power. And we'll get to what happens next in just a second. And it's slowly losing power in a couple of ways. One is the exchange rate. That's been weakening over time, but is also the highest it's been in 20 years. So it was going down, and now it's been going up because of the higher rates due to the Fed raising rates. It has increased more demand for USD. So when you hear people say, well, the US dollar is the strongest it's ever been, then how does that go together with the dollar declining over time? Well, it has been declining, and then it shot back up recently because of the higher interest rates that are available that lead to demand for USD. And then a second factor is the foreign currency reserves, which I mentioned. Those are decreasing. Countries are not putting as much money in the foreign exchange reserves as they used to. They probably, as a result of seeing what the U.S. did with sanctions against Russia, where they froze $600 billion or $600 million of Russian money in the foreign exchange reserves, and wouldn't let Russia have access to it because of their invasion of Ukraine. Other countries may have seen that and decided they didn't want to put money in the reserves as much, or they want to do it, diversify and invest elsewhere in the world because there are more options nowadays. And thirdly is China has been trying to become the reserve currency for 20 years, and they have been making progress, but they have a long way to go. For example, 88% of transactions happen in US dollar, whereas 2.2 happen in yuan. The yuan has been growing over time, but not at the expense of the US dollar. It's at the expense of the Japanese yen and the euro. So the US dollar is slowly losing some of its power. Also, partly because as countries take on more debt and they struggle, like the US has been struggling recently, and most economies have been, a country must choose to either default or print more money. When you print more money, as we all know now, raises inflation. The Fed has intervened in the market 3 times in this way. One, the dot-com bubble and bust, 2008 financial crisis, and COVID. And as countries print more money, it obviously affects the value of the currency. And it benefits the United States because the United States can print more money and can spend and print to offset that. But other countries that are reliant on the dollar just get all the negative factors for that. They can't print, but they have to go along with the devaluation of the dollar that happens along this printing. Let's see. So let's talk about the BRICS. The BRICS are slowly moving away, trying to move away and create their own currency that can be traded among them without involving the US dollar. Currently, they represent 31.5% of the world GDP. And a Cambridge study warned that the US dollar's dominant status should not be assumed forever, and that BRICS account for 31.5% of GDP, as I said, and 16% of world trade. So I think this is going to take a long time. Having lived in Brazil for 2 years and working in the banking sector, I can tell you that although I love Brazil, I love the Brazilian people, it's not always organized. It's hard to get things done in developing countries. And Brazil has had its issues in the past few years. I know there's some Brazilians that watch this channel, and with the turmoil with different presidents, in the last 3 or 4 presidents, there have been some issues. The unofficial slogan of Brazil is that it's the country of the future. When I lived there, they used to say it's the country of the future and always will be because of all their problems. Russia and China have their own issues. Russia has a real estate crisis with housing problems and corporations moving out of Russia thanks to COVID and all the lockdowns. Russia, we don't need to go into their problems. So can they get it together anytime soon enough to challenge the US dollar? I don't think so. It's going to take a long time. So even though the narrative is great for crypto, along with the money printing, those are the two major narratives in crypto, where the US is printing so much money and devaluing the dollar, and therefore Bitcoin is going to go up. Although I'm a crypto investor, let's be realistic about the real impact it's going to have on the dollar as countries slowly move to other alternatives. I think the money printing is a much more immediate problem, while the U.S. losing its reserve currency is not. So USD still dominates, and it will for a long, long time. So as an investor, that's not something we need to worry about because it's happening slowly, if it happens at all. If it happens at all, it will be decades from now. So as an investor, should we be thinking about this? Yeah, probably not. I think it's better use of time for us to focus on the fundamentals, focus on the habits. So what can we do? Focus on the things that we can control. Increase your income, decrease your expenses, and invest the difference largely in index funds. Try to make that delta as much as possible between income and expenses, and automatically invest through dollar cost averaging every time you get paid. So those habits, more than focusing on things in the news other than just wanting to learn about it, will make you a millionaire. There's a reason why more millionaires are made from simply contributing to a 401k and a Roth IRA consistently every single month than anything else. So focus on the fundamentals. It's interesting to hear about the demise of the dollar and world history and how the whole system works. I'm fascinated by it, and if you want more content about the economy and how it all works, then comment below and I'll post more on that. But focus on the fundamentals and what you can do today to save more money and invest more money every single month.